Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our uh, expert panel, The Real Effects of Nuclear Power, What the Industry Isn't Telling Us. I'm Jewel for the Society of High Prairie Regional Environmental Action Committee, and I'm joined today by Wanda from Peace River Environment Society and Angela. We'll introduce her in just a moment. Back in April 2026, we spoke with 6 experts in the field. The Regional Society of Environment Action Committee partnered with Peace River Environment Society to present this deeper dive into their topics of interest. We want to give our viewers more ideas about why anyone would object to nuclear power. One of the doctors said you could be forgiven for thinking it was the greatest thing ever, but there are so many horrific and long lasting effects that we are not told about. And that's why we're doing this series. Today, we're grateful to Angela Bischoff, representing the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, for this deep dive into her topic on the economics around nuclear power development, called Nuclear Power Bankrupts Us All, a case study in Ontario. And here's Wanda to introduce Angela.
Right. Angela Bischoff is a director of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, leading the charge for 100% renewable Ontario. Originally, Angela is from Edmonton, Alberta, with an active environmental history. She moved to Ontario to contribute her skills there, with close to 40 years in the environmental movement across 4 Canadian cities. She is also a yoga teacher, a cyclist, and a devoted caregiver. And over to you, Angela.
Thanks, Jewel and Wanda. It's really nice to be organizing with Albertans again because I left Alberta in 99 for Ontario. And of course, I still visit Alberta all the time. My family's there. And I have, a piece of my heart there. So you can imagine how upsetting it was when I learned that Alberta wanted to build 4 giant nuclear reactors on the beautiful Peace River. So I'd like to share with you today what Ontario's experience with you, what what Ontario's experience has been with nuclear power, because it's actually quite a nightmare. And
Highly relevant for us to learn about that because, yeah, this was all a big shock. It's the second proposal. The first one got roundly defeated, so we're just shocked. 10 years later, they came back with the same plan. And thank you so much for being with us to delve into the economics around
Okay,
it.
great. Let's go. Hopefully I can give you some good fodder to uh, fight it there in your communities. Okay, so I don't know if anybody saw Gordon Edwards' presentation earlier this week. I'm sure they'll be posted in a series, but I really recommend you watching Gordon's as well, even before mine, because he goes into the history of Canada's foray into nuclear fission. And really, it started in the 40s. Canada mined uranium and then produced plutonium. And you can only produce plutonium through a fissioning process. And so Canada fissioned uranium, produced plutonium, which was sold to the United States weapons program for 25
Angela,
years. Yep.
can I clarify that the fission process is a nuclear reactor producing power?
It's not producing power, but it is
Oh, okay.
producing heat and
Oh,
waste. And
those
that
early
waste,
ones. Yeah,
yeah, the waste contains the plutonium. And
right.
that plutonium was used in the American weapons program, which dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Fukushima. And actually, Gordon said in his presentation that most of the American thousands of bombs will contain a small amount of Canadian plutonium.
Mm.
So the nuclear industry then, when it started becoming, sort of an illegitimate form of there was protests to sending plutonium to the United States weapons program. The industry realized that they could produce power from this heat that was produced through the fissioning process. And that heat basically was just boil water to turn a turbine to produce electricity. Actually, the electricity is just a fleeting moment, but the real product of the fissioning process is the waste, which will remain into eternity. And the nuclear industry to date has no way of neutralizing that material, though they've been promising all along since the 40s to be able to neutralize it. They still have no idea how to do it. Anyways, Ontario was the center for the plutonium production, also uranium mining, which also came from Alberta and the Northwest Territories and Saskatchewan. But it was all refined in Ontario and sent from there to the United States. And that's where the nuclear reactors then were built.
So that's Canada's first nuclear reactors in Ontario.
Yeah. Sorry. There we go.
There's your next slide.
So to give you a sense where we are today in Ontario, we currently get almost 50% of our power from 18 nuclear reactors. There's not 18 working right now, but there were 18 built plus some research reactors, some other smaller reactors that have since closed. But presently we get about half our power from nuclear. So it's a real incumbent industry in this province, which is important. You realize how much power this industry has, how many jobs they provide, how many spin-off industries spin from here, communities that are centered around nuclear power that are completely funded because of this industry. But under Doug Ford's plan, who was elected in 2018, who first thing he did was cancel all the renewables programs. The goal of his plan is to increase our share of nuclear power by such that we'll be getting 75% of our power from nuclear in 2050, while renewables will fall. So the previous Liberal government, prior to the Doug Ford Conservative government getting elected in 2018, went full steam ahead at building renewables, such that today Ontario has more wind and solar than any other province in the country. About a quarter of our electricity comes from water power, mostly Niagara Falls. About 8% comes from wind power and about 2% from solar power. And when Doug Ford was elected, he canceled all of the future contracts that had been signed with the solar and wind industry.
Similar to Alberta, if I could
Yes,
interject, that's something that our current administration did a flip-flop on as well,
exactly. It's
which
the
sowed
exact same thing.
chaos.
And it killed the
But there's
renewables
more
industry.
jobs in renewables than in nuclear, isn't there?
Um, th there are lots of jobs, and there are lots of jobs in the nuclear industry. For example, there are 10,000 workers on the Sunshine List in Ontario, which are public sector service workers that earn more than $100,000 a year. 10,000 nuclear workers that are earning more than 100 grand a year. So just gives you a sense how big, that's a lot more than the renewable sector. But renewable sector would spread the jobs all around the province because that would include energy conservation and efficiency. It would include installation, building, construction, maintenance. And when Doug Ford canceled all the future contracts, the whole industry left the province and went to Alberta and other jurisdictions and started building renewables industries there. Now your government has also flip-flopped on renewables and they're going elsewhere. So
They've
you're
gone to
losing jobs.
Africa. They're doing amazing things in Africa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, and as the world moves to a renewable future, which I will talk more about, in Ontario, the share of renewables in this province will decline to 25% because all the existing large projects that were built during the previous government, they'll be coming to the end of their lives and they won't be replaced. So this is Doug Ford's plan. At the same time, he's instead of relying on renewables, building out renewables to back up the nuclear projects as there, because all the nuclear reactors that were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, now they're all old and being shut down and being replaced by being rebuilt. But as they shut them down, then they need backup power. So they're relying on gas instead of building out wind and solar. So they're ramping up the gas at the existing peaker plants in the province, and they're building new gas plants. And so when they were elected in 2018, the previous government I mentioned was ramping up renewables. They had also phased out coal, and that was due to the campaign of my group, the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, which was Ontario's greatest environmental achievement. We phased out the use of polluting coal, which was a quarter of our grid around the turn of the
Holy.
century. And citizen activism under the leadership of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance got really organized and pressured the government to commit to a coal phase out, which they did. And by 2015, the last lump of coal was burned in the province. Or do I have that in
That's an important
2014?
victory, a very
Yeah.
important victory.
And it was the first jurisdiction in the world to phase out coal for environmental and health reasons. And
Well,
yeah,
congratulations.
and since
But
then,
this natural gas thing, doesn't that kind of completely erode the argument about nuclear
yeah,
being about climate change?
yeah.
Because that's what they're trying to say, no emissions. But meanwhile, they're building gas plants.
Mhm. I just want to go back and just finish that previous thought, which was then the government of Canada also committed to a coal phase out for power production by 2030. So the provinces were working toward a coal phase out. Now, Alberta was still mining for coal, but it was for export. Except that Scott Moe now has been announcing this year that they're not going to phase out coal. They're going to thumb their nose at the federal government. But anyways, you're right. Back to Ontario. Now the provincial government is ramping up gas. You can see when they were elected, 4% of our grid came from gas. And by 2030, a quarter of our grid is going to come from gas. So but they say then it will be phased out by 2050. That's their plan, but who knows? Anyways, it does, you're right. Jewel put a lie to the fact that nukes are carbon neutral or a climate solution. And in fact, I would argue that um, nukes are aligned with fossil fuels. So the provinces that want to build nuclear reactors are the same provinces that want to extend or develop their fossil fuel reserves. And it's just sort of like carbon capture and storage provides a convenient excuse to keep burning fossil fuels and extracting fossil fuels. It's the same thing as with nuclear power. It allows the industry, the fossil fuel industry, to continue
And even
their
ramp up.
extraction. Pardon?
Yeah. And even ramp up.
And even ramp up.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so I've been talking about Doug Ford being all about nuclear and gas, nuclear and gas, nuclear and gas. Who benefits from Doug Ford's electricity plan? Well, it's the large energy utilities in the province. Enbridge Power is a natural gas or a gas company. Bruce Power is nuclear. TC Energy, gas, Western Canada. Cameco is uranium, Saskatchewan. And OPG, Ontario Power Generation, is Ontario's generation arm, and they own all of the nuclear reactors in the province. And their goal is to keep their industry running, keep the jobs flowing, keep the money flowing at whatever cost to the taxpayer, to the ratepayer. That's what their job is as the incumbent industry. All of these are incumbent industries. They're holding on to their jobs, to their power. Okay, give you a sense, Ontario built these reactors back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Pickering is 30 kilometers from the CN Tower in downtown Toronto. That's how close these reactors are. They're amongst the world's oldest and largest this is the world's one amongst the world's oldest and largest nuclear stations. 30 kilometers as the crow flies from downtown Toronto. In other words, if something happened at this station, all of Toronto would likely be evacuated. There's 2.2 million people that live within 30 kilometers of the Pickering nuclear station. All 8 reactors have been shut down, and 4 they're trying to rebuild. The Bruce station is currently the largest nuclear station in the world. It has the largest capacity in the world with 8 reactors, large reactors. All these reactors are CANDUs, by the way, which is a Canadian unique technology
Yeah.
that requires just uranium as the fissioning fuel. And all 8 reactors of the Bruce station are in the process of being rebuilt. So they come offline one at a time while they're being rebuilt, and the next one's being prepared. And I think maybe half of them have already been rebuilt. So it's still in the process. That's on Lake Huron, Pickering, Lake
So we're
Ontario,
talking about they were built in the 80s, so that's like
70s
45
and 80s.
years
Yeah.
ago or 50 years ago. And
Yeah.
so like every 50 years they have to basically shut down and completely get refurbished before they can
Yeah.
carry on again.
Actually, every 30 years.
Oh,
So Quebec had 2 reactors. They shut them down when they came to the end of their lives. The first one was shut down earlier. The second one, when it got their full pull hours, which is around 30 years, they shut it down because they are completely committed to moving to getting all future power with renewables, wind, solar, and their existing heritage hydro.
oh, good for them.
Yeah.
Bruce is the one who originally bought the proposal to do a nuclear plant by Peace River. And then after, years of toughing it out against the opposition, which is us, and all of the people who are against it, they backed off.
What year was that? That was like a decade ago or more.
Wanda, if you
It
want to
was
step in.
before Bruce took it over in 2008 or 2007 is when they made the proposal. And then Bruce took it over in like 2009 and then
Yes.
just went away.
Yeah,
So
amazing.
it's been a long time.
Mhm. They need
Um,
such massive amounts of government funding to make it workable. If the government's not fully engaged, it's just not going to happen.
well,
Uh,
government, we're talking about taxpayer funding. Every time it's
yeah.
government funding, that's taxpayers.
Well,
So this
government
is
commits it. Yeah.
you've got $20.9 billion just in debt, not the costs of these things, not the
Okay, let
costs
me
of doing.
finish. Let
Yeah,
me finish the slide. So
thank you.
next, Darlington is 20 kilometers further east of the Pickering reactor. So it's, again, very close to Toronto. And they had built 4 reactors. And yeah, so that's 8, 16, 20, right? 20 reactors. Um, then in the late 90s, they realized the building of these 20 reactors essentially bankrupted the old Ontario Hydro, and it was $36 billion in debt. And how do they manage that? The government of the day divvied up, took the debt and put it somewhere else, took the generation, the assets, gave it to OBG, took the transmission lines, gave that to um, another branch. And the debt went to the electricity financial, the the Electricity Financial Corporation or something. And that just got attached to our taxes, to the rate base, and we've been paying that off since the late 90s. But Ontario Hydro itself went bankrupt.
So this is just the current debt that's still existing after
Well,
the 90s?
that's a little bit no, that was what they ended taking over because
Oh,
OPG got
okay.
the assets. So the
Understood.
Electricity Financial Corporation took the $21 billion debt and started year by year paying it off. But we all paid for it. Taxpayers paid for it year by year. And some analysts say that we still haven't paid, that there's still a couple of $1 billion to be paid off. Jack, my colleague, isn't convinced that we haven't already paid it off. Maybe we have, but regardless, a lot of money that slowly we have been paying off. Doug Ford comes in and says, not only do we want to rebuild all of the existing fleet, so he wants to rebuild uh, basically all the existing fleet, but he also wants to build new nuclear stations. So he wants to build four, he's committed Ontario, and they've already begun the process to build four SMRs or small modular nuclear reactors, each 300 megawatts at a cost of what will cost likely at least $28 billion. Those SMRs are American technology and they require American fuel, enriched uranium fuel for the lifetime of those reactors.
So
much
Doug
for
Ford,
elbows up.
yeah, Doug Ford, the guy who's always with the
Yeah.
elbows up, he wants to go with American tech.
Yeah. American tech, small SMRs that require American fuel. Imagine it'd be very easy for Trump to say, we're not going to fuel those right now.
So no
And then,
kidding.
yeah.
Oh
So
man.
then he wants to rebuild four of the eight reactors at Pickering at a cost of $27 billion. That hasn't been completely approved yet. He wants to build the world's largest nuclear station at Port Hope, which is like twice the size of the existing Bruce nuclear station, which is already the largest operating capacity nuclear station in the world. So he wants to build a 10,000 megawatt station. That will cost $230 billion. And then he wants to build another nuclear station at the Bruce. So there's already 8 reactors there. They're all being rebuilt. Then he wants to build another probably 4 to 6 large reactors at Bruce at a cost of $110 billion. All told, $400 billion he's locking Ontarians into. How much is this going to cost? So this is current figures. This is how much Ontario currently will be paying. So it's what we pay now for energy efficiency, 3 cents. What we pay now for new solar and wind, and those prices are coming down. But earlier this year, Ontario bought new wind and solar contracts at 8.8 cents a kilowatt hour. OPG currently charges us 12.4 cents a kilowatt hour. That was this year. OPG has requested a 72% increase in the price they receive for nuclear power because all these new builds and new projects are, rating their profits. And so they want to bump up the price that they receive for nuclear power to 21 cents next year. They've applied to the Ontario Energy Board for that. And actually, the new nuclear reactors that they want to build, the SMRs at Darlington, the new reactors that they're talking about at Bruce and Wesleyville, 31 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's based on what the last brand new nuclear reactors cost in the United States. So we're going with the
It,
latest technology that's been used. Yeah.
it seems like often when they talk about how much nuclear is going to cost, it turns out to be a lot more than what they said.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's inevitably going to happen, especially because these stations are going to take decades to build. So by then, the prices are going to keep going up, and the prices for wind and solar are going to keep going down. So, and I mentioned, that the SMRs that they're building, the small modular nuclear reactors, that's been the big trend. Canada has been saying that they're going to lead a new generation of small modular reactors. Well, and the four that they've chosen at Darlington is are four American designed GE Hitachi SMRs. And they're also considering, I said, at the Port Hope station and at the Bruce station, they want to build large reactors. So they're considering Westinghouse reactors, which are American reactors that would also require enriched uranium fuel from the United States.
Apparently, the Westinghouse was purchased by Cameco and Brookfield.
Half.
And
Yeah, half.
shouldn't those two names make us wonder why would Ontario want Westinghouse? And not not one of these is can do. Isn't that interesting? And yet
Well,
can do technology, they're throwing that name around. And do people realize, no, they are not doing can do. They're going with these American models.
okay, let me confirm, Wanda. When they claim the technology that they are considering, they include CANDO. So CANDO, Westinghouse, and GE Hitachi. And both the GE Hitachi and the Westinghouse would require American enriched uranium fuel because we don't enrich it in Canada because it's too dangerous and too expensive. Because when you enrich the uranium, you're pulling out the plutonium and then you make it available for nefarious purposes because the plutonium can be used in the weapons industry. But they're also pushing CANDUs as an option. Now they gave up on CANDUs decades ago. And that's when the whole, pro-nuclear industry started going SMRs, SMRs, SMRs. Well, now they're thinking, well, maybe CANDU is the way to go because we don't need to enrich the fuel. We can use just uranium from Canada. So you can imagine Cameco is pushing for CANDUs. Now the nuclear industry is pushing for CANDUs, which just 6 years ago, CANDUs were like history, too expensive. They thought they could save money on the SMRs, but now they're back to CANDUs.
And it's partly this geopolitical situation. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
understood.
Okay, so what have all these reactors and projects done to Ontario's electricity rates? Okay, well, last November, residential electricity generation rates rose by 29%. So OPG
Ouch.
asked for an increase, rates rose by 29%. But actually, the previous government did this as well. But Doug Ford is taking full advantage of this. They implemented what's called the Ontario Electricity Rebate. So on your electricity bill, it shows what your electricity bill should be and how much, or what it is, how much you're paying, and how much the rebate is. So the rebate right now, as they raised the rebate from 13% to 23%, that means taxpayers are paying a quarter of my electricity bill because I would be very upset if my electricity bill rose by 25% and suddenly it's $150 instead of 120. So I'd be pissed off. And then especially if I heard from the Clean Air Alliance that it was because of high cost nuclear projects, I'd be anti-nuclear. So they just give you this rebate every month, but all taxpayers are paying the rebate. Like you
It's
see the
like a
rebate.
shell game.
Yeah, it's just a shell game.
Oh,
So, and that rebate total $7 billion a year that the taxpayer has to shell out. So of our, like,
For
since
your own electricity.
yeah.
Angela, just a ball, a softball question out of the blue here. Has there ever been any corporate investment in nuclear in Canada?
Yes. I like the Bruce nuclear station is owned by OPG, but it's run and operated by Bruce Power. So there's an example of, that's a private
But
corporation.
that's the nuclear
They've
industry
invested money into
itself.
it. They've invested lots of money into it, but they get all the profits. And if there's
Yes.
an accident, Ontario taxpayers and federal taxpayers are on the hook. And the waste is managed and handled and paid for by taxpayers. So Bruce Power, this private corporation, gets to profit from power that's sold to the grid, but they don't have to take any of the risks of accidents or waste. So there's
And
one
how,
example.
but weren't they originally financed by government as well, by taxpayers?
They probably got this station for free. I don't know how that works, but maybe they rent it. But Ontario taxpayers own the Bruce nuclear station, and the private corporation came in and, trained people and put their own money into upgrading. I'm not really sure how much they actually did, but I can't flesh
We're
that out
trying
for
to
you,
track
Jill.
that. Thank you. Thank you for your expert
Okay.
perspective. Yeah.
Okay. That wasn't very clear, but I tried. Okay, so our current deficit keeps increasing every year. Ontario's deficit right now is $13.5 billion, of which half of that goes to artificially lower electricity rates. So people don't realize how high cost the nuclear projects are. It's
Oh,
such a crazy scam. Anyways, on top of it, OPG is now applying for another 72% increase next year to pay for cost overruns of new nuclear projects. So it's just like it just
so
never
that's
ends.
100%, 100%, in
Uh,
a couple of years
yeah,
increase. Incredible.
in the price they receive for the power, yeah.
Right.
So meanwhile, I mentioned the waste. So, and I mentioned earlier that, the real product of the nuclear fissioning is isn't the electricity. That's just this fleeting, they're just boiling water and grabbing the electricity. The real product is the waste. And that's what Dr. Gordon Edwards talks about all the time. The waste is going to be around for a million years at at least. Like the industry itself, the nuclear industry says it needs to be isolated from the environment for 1 million years. So like how do you even fathom that? Currently, Ontario, all of Canada's high-level nuclear fuel waste sits on site where it's produced. So each of those reactor sites contains its own high-level nuclear fuel waste. But you can imagine that's 3.5 million fuel bundles. It's a PR nightmare for the industry because over the years, various bodies are saying you can't keep producing it if you can't figure out how to isolate it or neutralize it or store it or make it safe. So currently they're trying to make it safe. They're in conventional storage buildings on site of all the facilities. The environmental community is asking for that conventional storage to actually be much more robust, above ground, attack resistant, reinforced concrete pulled away from the water body. We could make it much safer. In Germany, they store it in much safer canisters. Canada's kind of lazy. We thought we'd be dealing with it right now. We still haven't figured it out. I mentioned how there's so much plutonium, and which is, the war is the main product used in nuclear weapons. There's as much plutonium at just the Pickering site alone, which is Canada's oldest nuclear station with 8 reactors, all shut down now. There's as much plutonium there as as 11,000 nuclear warheads. Like we could, that's how much if it was extracted. We're talking a massive amount of deadly, deadly material here that we have to store for a million years because we don't want future nefarious governments to be able to come in and extract it easily. It's not that hard to do. That's what Iran is doing under the guise of enriching uranium to fuel their nuclear reactors. And, Donald Trump and the world is saying, we don't want you enriching uranium to produce bombs. And they're saying, well, we only want
Like
it.
we have.
Yeah, well, we have, but you can't, which is good. I don't want them to have nuclear weapons either. But
No, nobody
but
should.
they claim that they're, and now Trump has just made a deal with Saudi Arabia to allow them to enrich uranium. So Saudi Arabia can then have their own nuclear weapons. Like this is just insane.
I
So,
don't think that's the nuclear renaissance that our prime minister was hoping for, but there it is.
yeah.
Oh,
So
there's the
the
DGR.
yeah, the best that the industry can come up with for all, these millions of fuel bundles of high-level nuclear waste is to bury it in a hole. So there's one being built in France, there's one being built in Finland. There's a lot of talk of building one in the United States, and there's talk of building one in Canada. The nuclear industry, the provinces that have high-level nuclear fuel waste, so that's New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, and I think Manitoba is part of no, maybe it's Bruce Power, Ontario Power Generation, Hydro-Quebec, and New Brunswick Power. They've come together, from the direction of government to figure out what to do with the waste, and they want to build a hole up in northwestern Ontario on First Nations land north of Lake Superior, very near where all the massive wildfires were, where First Nations were evacuated just last week. That's where they want to bury all of Canada's high-level nuclear fuel waste. It would take 3 trucks a day for 50 years to ship all of that, all of Canada's high-level nuclear fuel waste to that site. And in the
Wow.
meantime, that's just the existing waste. Then we're continuing to create more nuclear waste and different nuclear waste because it's not just all can-do waste. It's going to be GE Hitachi waste, which is totally different and will need to be repackaged and buried in different places. So it's just on, and it's going to cost tens of billions of dollars. I should say that there's no existing licensed DGR or Deep Geologic Repository currently hosting high-level nuclear fuel waste anywhere in the world. There are some that are being built, but there are 3 DGRs that are currently hosting low and intermediate level waste. Nuclear fuel waste is considered the high level. So those 3 DGRs that are hosting low and intermediate level fuel waste, all 3 have failed. And one of them has failed so badly in Aussee, Germany, that they have to bring all the waste that's buried down there, bring it all back up to the surface and come up and repackage everything and come up with a different place to bury the waste because it leaked. And then it's going to go into the groundwater. And of course it's going to leak. It's so despite
It's
industry's
something that happens
confidence, it's going to
underground.
work. Sorry?
Yeah, that's definitely something that happens underground. There's movement, there's water, there's things going on. I mean, it seems to us like it's just solid, but it really isn't. It has a different time scale, a geological time scale. So
Exactly.
dangerous.
Okay, so how does this affect the environment? Like, there's just a few more things that I haven't really mentioned yet about the dangers of nuclear waste and the whole fission process and uranium mining. Dr. Gordon Edwards did a lot of really good background onto uranium mining, so I'm not going to touch that, but catch it in his presentation. It's just mind-blowing. Climate change demands that we act now, not in decades. So I've already mentioned that, Ontario's plan as we build new nuclear reactors is to burn more and more gas. And Alberta's plan of building new nuclear reactors, they claim it's because we're committed to reducing our climate emissions. Meanwhile, it's just being used to justify building more and more pipelines and more extraction from the tar sands. They're not talking about wind and if they were really committed to reducing climate emissions, they would be building out wind and solar, not nukes.
That's
It would
right.
take
It's like an
decades.
excuse.
It's an excuse to delay action. And it's all the conservative governments that don't believe in climate change or don't want to act on climate change, those are the ones that want new nukes. All nuclear reactors release radioactive carcinogenic elements routinely. So we had a radiation biologist look at the Pickering nuclear station, which I mentioned is 30 kilometers from downtown Toronto. And he said there was so much tritium released into the air and water routinely on a daily basis. He estimated 100 kilograms of tritiated water vapor entering into the air and into the water every day.
But
And
isn't the Pickering reactor closed?
well, it just closed this year. The final reactors just closed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But
But
they've
they're
been
still
running.
emitting, I understood,
Well,
even though
I'm
they're
sure they are still
closed.
emitting. I can
Yeah,
imagine, but not as much probably as when they were working. But
yeah.
there's so many nuclear facilities, both at the north side and on the US border as well, around Lake Ontario, that there's twice as much tritium in Lake Ontario than in Lake Superior, which has no nuclear facilities. And tritium is a carcinogen, causes cancer, mutates genes, and a teratogen, crosses the placental barrier to alter the embryo.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and that's just routine emissions. Imagine if there's accidents like Fukushima or Chernobyl. I've already mentioned how many millions of people live around Pickering or any of these stations.
So
Accidents
those are the
happen.
allowable emissions. Tritium, carbon
Yeah,
14, they're allowed to do that. That's just routine.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so when accidents happen, they might be very rare, but when they happen, they're catastrophic. Why would we risk that when we have alternative lower cost options, which I'll get into in a minute? And it's an intergenerational injustice in that we're leaving debt and environmental legacy of high level fuel waste and decommissioning of these reactors. We're leaving all of that to future generations to have to deal with and manage. And then we've already talked about the connection between weapons and energy. So then in comes Carney. Oh, I could not believe it this year. We all were so hopeful that he was going to be our climate champion and introduce a whole new generation of wind and solar energy. Instead, he announces in June of this year a federal nuclear strategy. And their commitment is to build 10 new large-scale nuclear reactors. I think he said, and he even gave it a timeline. A couple of them needed to be built by 2035 and the rest to be built by 2045, something like that. And to make them all, and notice it's large scale. He didn't say SMRs, so they've given up on the SMRs thing. He didn't say what technology, but he wants them to expand and explore can-do reactors because he wants to export can-do technology around the world. So we have exported a few reactors, a few can-do reactors around the world in the last, we haven't for like 2 decades because the can-do industry just died. But decades ago, in the 60s, we exported CANDU reactor technology to India to give them nuclear power. They promptly produced nuclear weapons with them. Same thing, we gave CANDU to Pakistan. They now have nuclear weapons as well. So why would we be, now Poland wants nuclear reactors because they want, Estonia wants nuclear reactors because they want to protect themselves from the bad Russians. They want they want nuclear reactor technology so that they too can get into the nuclear weapons game.
And Canada is the only technology that does that, eh? The can do. All the
No,
other
no, no.
technology uses enriched.
No, that
No,
doesn't use it. Can-dos do not use enriched.
right. But that's why they can produce the,
Well, I think that's a good question. I would presume all reactor technologies, Westinghouse, etc., they all produce plutonium.
okay,
The difference is they require enriched uranium to fuel
to
them.
operate. And
Yeah,
can do's can use raw uranium. Okay,
yeah,
got it.
yeah.
Thanks. Sorry.
No, you're good. So Carney is saying this is going to cost $100 billion. I don't know if this is all taxpayer dollars. They want to use the Canada Strong Fund, meaning Canadians, that's something, another new initiative of Carney where Canadians can invest, give money to the feds basically to invest in large projects. That means you or I could give thousands of dollars to Canada Strong Fund. They invest it in nuclear reactors. He wants to de-risk these new build projects and fast track the regulatory approvals. So one of the things he's doing is he's limiting how fast they need to approve these projects, limited to 2 years. They have to push it through. And currently, environmental assessments are done by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. Now there's public process going on to give it feedback to this idea to instead make the regulatory approvals for new nuclear reactors to go through the CNSC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission,
But aren't they our
which
regulators? There are regulators,
they
Canadian
are.
Nuclear Safety Commission. So why would the regulator be the one to do the impact assessment? That's something our group really struggled with. It seems like a
Mhm.
conflict of interest.
It is because the CNSC has never not approved a nuclear license that has been requested of it. So they're considered a captured regulator. They essentially work for the industry and they report to the Natural Resources Canada Department, NRCan. They report to NRCan. And part of NRCan's directive from Carney is to promote nuclear power. So it is a conflict of interest. It's very clearly a conflict, whereas the Impact Assessment Agency had an arm's length role in doing
Mhm.
environmental assessments. So we're very worried about this direction. One last thing, his plan, his nuclear strategy, is that they want to get microreactors in remote indigenous communities. They want to try it. They want to start experimenting, putting nuclear reactors in the north. Now,
But
maybe
didn't you say that they all failed, that there aren't any SMRs? Like even the small modular nuclear reactor that they're building at Darlington is I think it's only like 30% smaller, but it produces 5 times less power. So it's not exactly a success story when it comes to SMNRs.
well,
So
it's never been built before, so we don't even
exactly.
know. It's
Oh,
an
so
experiment. It's
dangerous.
just a
Oh,
PowerPoint reactor. But there are about 150 different designs of SMRs or SMNRs, as you call them, small modular nuclear reactors.
that haven't
They're
been
all
built yet.
competing. They all want these contracts, and they
But none
all
of them have ever been built.
no. And they're
Oh,
all asking for government funding because the private industry is not putting money into them. So in the States, Trump is giving them hundreds of billions of dollars, and now Carney's stepping up to give the industry this says 100 billion, but there's a lot more going, like Canada's already spent billions. I think there's half a dozen projects in that are under study in Chalk River, just upstream from Ottawa, which is Canada's hub of all the nuclear research. And that's now being run by the nuclear industry. And most of the nuclear industry that's running the Chalk River facility, all this experimentation with these SMRs, they're American companies that also have ties with nuclear weapons companies.
Oh,
It's like
even
you can't
worse.
make this shit up, right? It's just worse and worse. Okay, meanwhile, so this is Canada, but meanwhile, the world is going renewable so fast, you can't even believe it, especially now with the war in Iran and the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz. Countries are just supercharging to renewables. Why should they remain dependent on fossil fuels when most of the world does not produce their own fossil fuels? They have to import it from petrostates, of which Canada is one. So
Mhm.
they're saying, why would we do that? How can we lower that, including China, but all of them? So in 20, I mentioned now because of the war, it's being supercharged, but it had already started in the last decade. In 2024, 92% of the world's new electricity added to global production was renewable, mostly solar.
Thing.
So, like, nobody's building nuclear reactors. They're not building pipelines, they're building renewables. And in fact, the share of nuclear power around the world in the late 90s, 17% of global electricity came from nuclear power. But all those nuclear reactors have since been, they're all shutting down. And we're now down to 8.8% of the global share of electricity around the world is nuclear. Because, after Chernobyl and then again after Fukushima, the world is like, why would we keep building nuclear reactors, especially when renewables are way cheaper? So the transition is well underway. China is leading this transition. They are installing 3,000 megawatts of solar power every day. So these large reactors that Carney wants to build, let's say they're about 1,000 megawatts. So they're installing 3,000 megawatts of solar a day. That's the equivalent of 3 nuclear reactors every day. Now,
Amazing.
Carney wants to build 10 nuclear reactors by 2045. That's 2 decades away, 10 reactors, compared to China installing 3 nuclear reactors worth of solar power every day. That's what's happening in
3,000
the world. That's
kilowatts.
it's going, and they have surplus. They are providing the lesser developed countries like the Philippines and Indonesia and Australia and or not that they're lesser developed and Africa and Pakistan with really cheap solar panels. So that
They
means
don't have to worry about fuel ever again.
yeah, they just buy it. It's just like capital cost, and
Mhm.
they get free fuel for the next 30 years. So Southern nations are leapfrogging past the fossil fuel and past the nuclear age. For example, Pakistan installed 27 gigawatts. Now remember, a nuclear reactor is 1,000. A large nuclear reactor is 1,000 megawatts. So that's the equivalent of 27 nuclear reactors. Pakistan installed that with solar panels in 2 years between 23 and 25. And
Amazing.
it's mostly guerrilla installations, those solar panels. It's just people going, I can't get the grid is so unreliable here and expensive. I'm cutting from the grid and I'm just putting my solar panels on my roof. You just go down to the local store, buy the solar panel on your roof, and you're free of having to pay whoever that power
which
forever.
which is why in my letter to regarding the IAAC, I said why aren't we going to local, regional cooperatives, municipalities? Like, why are we talking about this great big grid? What a waste of money. Like, let's just down, but they don't want to do that
Well,
because
they don't, but those things are being done. There are cooperatives, there
yes,
are municipalities. People are doing this on their own. Like,
but
just like
no government money.
Angela
There,
said in Pakistan, I don't know that we would call ourselves guerrillas, like we are doing it in collaboration with our utility providers, but it is happening. It's ongoing. It's still happening, even though Alberta canceled so many contracts for large scale solar. People are still going, and businesses are still doing the rooftop solar, the individual. Sorry, we should wrap this up, Angela. I know you have a few more slides, and me and Wanda just keep butting in. We'll let you finish.
Just wanted to add, Wanda, about community power. In Germany, they have been investing in renewables for years, and they've been using a community model to really ramp that up. And they phased out all their new, like after Fukushima, which was 2011. Germany was one of the countries that said, okay, we're going to phase out our nuclear reactors. They had lots, like 50 or something, but they were also all old. So they shut them down by 2022 and they started ramping up renewables, which is what they've done. Emissions have been declining, but I think about half of all the renewable power owned in Germany is owned by the community. So distributed grids, cooperative financing, and that's how they get community buy-in. It's not some big corporation coming in, which is what happened in Ontario, big corporations, and people, rebelled against that large sort of capitalist model. But Germany was smarter in they followed a community model. So just wrapping up here, solar is really what's taking off around the world. Solar and wind as well. But there's solar farms, there's agrivoltaics, so solar farms that combine with agriculture. It turns out some crops actually like to have shade. Deserts like shade. Micro systems grow underneath that shade. China's putting huge solar plants over deserts and creating like new ecosystems. Ontario
Amazing.
could meet 100% of our electricity needs with solar farms alone, covering just 0.4% of Ontario's area. So, like when someone says we couldn't do it, it's just not true. Solar, wind, plus
Batteries.
batteries, and also on rooftops and parking lots. For example, in Toronto alone, we've analyzed the rooftop and parking lot solar potential. That alone, just that, could produce 50% of Toronto's electricity needs. So
Amazing.
easy if we were committed to it. Same thing with wind power. So we're promoters of offshore wind in the Great Lakes. A study was done for the provincial government about a decade ago. Great Lakes offshore wind power in I think it was 26 sites around, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and Lake Huron could produce 100% of Ontario's electricity needs. The
Is
UK,
that
so
right?
right now, Ontario, our grid is around 26 gigawatts. Now, the UK already has 16 gigawatts of offshore wind power, and they're aiming for 50 gigawatts by 2030. It's so
Wow.
much cheaper now, and the turbines are getting so much bigger and so much more efficient. They used to be much smaller, now they're much bigger. Denmark is creating offshore wind hub islands in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. They're connecting the UK, Denmark, and Germany and Belgium with, sharing wind power amongst these countries. Nova Scotia wants to build a 40 gigawatt a series of wind farms off their shore to power all of Nova Scotia and to export through an east-west grid to Quebec, to, the other maritime provinces, and even to Ontario. That's what we support Carney's goal to have an east-west electricity grid more connected. That's great. We want more of Quebec's water power and Manitoba's water power to help us phase out gas, help us reduce our dependence on nuclear power, for example. I know the feds are interested in speaking with Nova Scotia about this Wind West project, which is this offshore wind in Nova Scotia, but that no announcements have been made in terms of for funding.
That's exciting.
So much funding's already gone to the nuclear industry, but not to the renewables industry yet federally from Carney's office. And the Audubon Society and other nature organizations are saying climate change is really going to impact wildlife. We support offshore wind. It can be built with minimal aquatic impacts. There's research now how to make it more effective. There's floating wind turbines, there's attached wind turbines. You can turn the turbines off. That's, during bat migration season, you can paint one blade a different color to make it less attractive to certain birds, things like that. So, to conclude, over the last decade, wind power costs have declined 65%. Solar has declined 75%. Batteries, the cost of batteries and the technology has improved so much that the prices have reduced 90%. In California, just since 2023, fossil gas is down 60%, while solar is up, and batteries, they're really relying on batteries, has been up 328%. So we're entering the age of batteries right now. California's battery fleet already is discharging 13 gigawatts of power. That's equivalent of 13 nuclear power reactors, large reactors, at times supplying more than 40% of California's entire grid. So they're really complementing solar during the day. Wind power is strongest in the night. Solar is most effective in the summer. Wind power is most effective at night. And storage balances it all out.
All of that. Yeah.
Australia now, they've built out so much solar and batteries that they need people to use the power during low peak times, which is between 12 and 3 p.m. So they're giving it away for free. So people are now figuring out they can get batteries, they can get free electricity during the day, and then use their batteries to give them free electricity at night. So they're
Oh,
really
store it.
figuring it out.
Wow.
Yeah, they're storing it.
Amazing.
Germany phased out their nukes in 2023. They're replacing them with renewables. Emissions have declined. And China's really the only country that's maybe building some nuclear reactors. But they've also installed 100, so in year 23, 24, they installed 197 times more solar and wind than nuclear. So they're totally committed to going renewable. The future is renewable here, there, everywhere. Please follow the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. If you want to join our email list, I'm going to give Jewel a couple of links to pop into the description of the video below so that you can follow us. You can send a letter to Carney saying, I'll give you the letter tool, make it really easy for you to send a letter to Carney and your MP saying, we want renewables, not new nuclear. And then if you do send that letter, and you'll get added to my email list and you'll get our regular bulletins.
That sounds like a great letter. I'd be willing to sign that letter. And yeah, thanks for all your work, Angela, and the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. We really appreciate it. And it seems obvious to us, the evidence is in. Nuclear is a very expensive boondoggle, and it could bankrupt us as it has done in Ontario and with nefarious shell games. You guys are still possibly still paying for it from the 90s. My goodness. Well, thank you so very much for your presentation today. And we'll
Thank
get
you
it
for
up
giving
on
me the space to speak about it.
our pleasure. We'll do some little clipping, I think, and get it up on YouTube. And we're also going to make shorts for TikTok and Instagram. So you can follow REAC on those platforms. And thanks again, everyone.